I never thought I'd be telling this story. Certainly not like this. My name is Laura Bennett. I'm 32. I run a boutique graphic design agency called Arrow and Oak right from my home office in Willow Creek Estates, just outside Chicago. It's a business I built from nothing over the past 5 years, pouring my heart and soul into every client project and late-night deadline. Not that the HOA board ever saw it that way. Barbara Kensington and her crew always treated me like the neighborhood failure because I didn't conform to their rigid cookie-cutter lifestyle like the other residents. Her husband Greg, they've always said I was too creative, too dramatic, or too much, but I stayed in the community. I stayed compliant until the day they burned a check for $38 million and smiled while doing it. What they didn't know is that check was never real. March 15th, 2023, 7:42 p.m., the Willow Creek Community Center. I can still see the way the light caught the polished oak conference table as the lawyer read Uncle Walter's will. The room smelled of fresh-cut grass and old money, fitting for the annual HOA gathering that doubled as a family-style power play. Barbara and Greg stood across from me, their faces betraying nothing but calm confidence, the kind that comes from knowing you've already won. To my niece Laura, I leave $38 million in stock options for my private holdings in Evergreen Community Management, Mr. Calloway read, his voice steady and professional. A collective gasp filled the room. All eyes turned to me. I reached for the envelope, my hand trembling slightly, but Barbara was faster. She snatched it from the lawyer's hand, her red nails digging into the expensive paper. Greg pulled a silver lighter from his coat pocket, the one Uncle Walter had given him years ago when he first joined the board. The irony wasn't lost on me. That's what he gets for rewarding rule breakers, Barbara said as the flame caught the corner of the envelope marked to Laura. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just watched as the paper curled and blackened, carrying with it what they thought was my future. Because what they burned wasn't the reward. It was the bait. Growing up in Willow Creek Estates meant learning early that community standards came with conditions. The Kensingtons were the golden family. Greg, the senior board member at the HOA's legal firm, married to Barbara, the perfect society maven and charity chair for causes she cared nothing about. Their son Daniel, Harvard-educated attorney and HOA treasurer, was flawless in every way that mattered to the board. I was different. I had ideas. I asked questions. I wanted to create rather than just enforce covenants. Each of those choices pulled me further from their approval. Why can't you be more like the other residents, like Daniel? Became the soundtrack of my life in the neighborhood. Later it morphed into no one will take you seriously with that ridiculous home business, and eventually you're throwing the whole community's aesthetic away. Barbara Kensington turned comparison into an art form. The HOA group chats became showcases for Daniel's achievements. Her monthly newsletter might as well have been a shrine to him. Daniel just won the big compliance case. Daniel and his wife just installed the most darling drought-resistant landscaping. Daniel's been made head of enforcement. My little design wins never made the cut. Greg was subtler, but no less damaging. He used fines as both carrot and stick. When you get a real job outside the home, we'll talk about waiving that violation fee. If you'd chosen a proper career, you wouldn't be struggling with that little business of yours. Then there was Aunt Joanne on the board, who fed the narrative that I was unstable. Barbara, have you noticed how emotional Laura gets? She'd stage whisper at meetings. Maybe she should see someone. This because I'd push back once on a ridiculous fine for my mailbox color while the rest of them networked with potential clients. I try to maintain boundaries. I try to earn their respect. But the pattern was set long before I had the language to describe it. In 2015, they used my name and social security number to co-sign a $22,000 loan for Daniel's luxury SUV through the HOA Emergency Fund. I only discovered it when I tried to get a small business expansion loan and was denied due to existing debt obligations. It's just temporary, Greg assured me. Daniel will make the payments. It's not like you need good credit for that hobby business anyway. 2 years later, Barbara borrowed $8,000 from my client escrow account without asking. I only found out when a vendor payment bounced, costing me a crucial client. I was going to pay it back, she said, indignant that I would even question her. Don't be so dramatic. The board helps each other. The Thanksgiving 2019 block party was the first holiday after I'd expanded my home office. I offered to host a small design workshop, excited to show them I was building something on my own terms. Greg's response: "You're not really board material when it comes to important community events, Laura. Let's leave it to Barbara. She knows how these things should be done." But the worst betrayal came in 2021 when they convinced Uncle Walter I was stealing from the community trust after I refused to co-sign a second mortgage on their oversized pool expansion. They didn't need the money. They wanted a bigger deck. But they told him I'd been embezzling from the HOA accounts I helped manage as a volunteer. He believed them for a while. The texts never stopped. "Laura, you always make things harder. Why can't you just be like Daniel? We don't ask for much. Uncle Walter would be so disappointed in you." After everything we've done for the neighborhood, I stayed. I endured. I built my business despite them, not because of them. And I maintained a relationship with Uncle Walter even when he was cold and suspicious of me. Then in January 2023, Uncle Walter called me. "Laura, I need to see you alone. Don't tell the board." His voice sounded older, frielier than I remembered, but there was something else there: resolve. We met at his favorite spot, a small cafe near the Art Institute. He was already seated when I arrived, his hands wrapped around a cup of black coffee. "I've been a fool," he said without preamble. "The Kensingtons, they've been lying to me about you." My heart stuttered. "What do you mean?" He slid a folder across the table. Inside were bank statements, emails, text messages, evidence the board had been systematically undermining me while siphoning money from accounts they thought no one was monitoring. "I hired a private investigator," he explained. "After that holiday meeting, when you mentioned the SUV loan, something didn't add up. You've never been the person they described." Tears pricked in my eyes, but I blinked them back. Years of conditioning had taught me that showing emotion was a weakness they would exploit. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," Uncle Walter said, reaching for my hand, "we make things right." Over the next few weeks, Uncle Walter and I met secretly with his personal attorney, not the HOA's firm. On February 3rd, 2023, at 10:13 a.m., he transferred 48% ownership in Evergreen Community Management to me. The paperwork was witnessed, notarized, and filed with the state before noon. He also signed over the deed to his estate property in Willow Creek, worth about $1.6 million, and gave me sole control over the community trust he'd established decades ago. "Don't tell them," he warned. "Not yet. They'll try to fight it. And I want to make sure everything is ironclad." I kept the secret. I didn't even tell my fiancé, Devin, though he knew something was happening from the late-night phone calls and mysterious meetings. Then on February 26th, Uncle Walter passed away in his sleep. The board gathered, appropriately somber in public, calculating in private. I overheard Barbara and Greg discussing how the estate would be divided before Uncle Walter's body was even cold. "Walter always said he'd take care of the community," Greg said. "After everything we've done to maintain the standards and keep certain elements in line," Barbara added with a pointed look in my direction. The reading of the will was scheduled for March 15th at the Willow Creek Community Center, where the board had held every important event since I moved in. 17 board members, plus the lawyers, gathered in the private ballroom. The air was thick with anticipation and barely concealed greed. Mr. Calloway, the HOA attorney who knew nothing of Uncle Walter's private arrangements, began reading the standard bequests, small items to distant relatives, charitable donations to the neighborhood fund. Then came the bombshell that wasn't really a bombshell at all. "To my niece Laura, I leave $38 million in stock options for my private holdings in Evergreen Community Management." The envelope burning happened exactly as I described. What I didn't mention was what came next. As I walked out silent and smiling, I heard Greg say she'll come crawling back when she realizes what she's lost. But I hadn't lost anything. That night, I opened my secure vault box at the Fairline Depository and pulled out the real documents Uncle Walter had given me. Along with them was a letter. Laura, by now they've shown their true colors. I've arranged for a false bequest, something significant enough to make them show their hands, but ultimately meaningless. The real transfer of assets happened weeks ago. I'm sorry I didn't see through them sooner. I'm sorry for the years you suffered while I believed their lies. But you're stronger than all of us, and now you have the resources to prove it. Use this power wisely, not for revenge, but for justice. Love, Uncle Walter. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the vault. Revenge wasn't my goal. Justice was, and justice required patience. Over the next 6 weeks, I gathered everything I needed. Certified copies of the ownership transfer, voicemails from Uncle Walter warning me, "Don't trust them with this, Laura. They'll destroy you to get it." Text from Barbara, "If you had anything real, we'd have known about it by now." LOL. Bank records showing the pattern of financial abuse through the HOA accounts. I hired Morrison & Associates, a rival firm to Greg's, to file a formal motion to remove Barbara, Greg, and Daniel from the trust. I timed my move to coincide with the annual Evergreen Board meeting, where I was now the deciding vote. Throughout this process, I had one secret ally, MS. Ellen Burke, Uncle Walter's old attorney, who was cut off by the board years ago when she questioned some of Greg's financial decisions. She had always believed in me, and now she was helping me execute the plan that would finally free the neighborhood from the Kensington's toxic grip. April 28th, 2023, 2:12 p.m. Oakwood Country Club. The annual Willow Creek Spring Luncheon was a tradition started by Uncle Walter decades ago. Every board member attended. It was mandatory in all but name. I arrived 30 minutes late, wearing a tailored black jumpsuit and navy silk blazer, an outfit chosen specifically because Barbara had once told me I didn't have the figure for jumpsuits and should stick to dresses like proper ladies. Conversation stopped as I walked in. Greg stood up, annoyance clear on his face. "Nice of you to join us, Laura. We were just discussing the summer enforcement schedule." "Sorry I'm late," I said, my voice steady. "I had a board meeting." Confusion rippled across the table. "What are you talking about?" Daniel asked, his Harvard-educated brain not quite computing my words. "I think it's better if I show you." I nodded to the waiter who had been prepped in advance. He dimmed the lights and pulled down the projection screen the club used for golf tournament announcements. I connected my laptop and opened a presentation that had taken weeks to prepare. Slide 1. Certificate of stock ownership for Evergreen Community Management with my name clearly listed as holding 48% of shares. "This is a joke," Greg said, but his voice lacked conviction. Slide 2. Evergreen Trust deed transfer signed and dated February 3rd, 2023. "You forged this," Barbara hissed, her perfectly manicured hand gripping her water glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. Slide 3. A recorded message from Uncle Walter. His face appeared on screen, older and more tired than most in the room remembered him. "If you're hearing this, Laura stood alone, and I trust her more than I ever trusted the board. The documents you've just seen are real. The assets have been transferred. The decisions are final." The room erupted. "This is a joke." "You forged this," Greg repeated louder this time, as if volume could make it true. "You're sick, Laura. You need help," Barbara said, her voice dripping with the same concern she'd used to undermine me for years. Daniel stood up, his lawyer face on. "You'll regret this when the press hears about your mental breakdown." A cousin I barely spoke to yelled from the back of the room. "You lied to all of us about the covenants." That's when Ellen Burke stepped out from where she'd been waiting by the door. "Everything you've seen has already been verified in court," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "The community trust no longer has your names on it. Barbara, Greg, and Daniel. Your positions as co-trustees have been terminated effective immediately." Gasps, silence, then fury. Greg lunged toward me, but was stopped by Uncle Robert. Ironically, the board member who had always seemed most detached from our drama. "Don't make this worse, Greg," he said quietly. "You ungrateful little..." Barbara started, but I cut her off. "I'm not here for a fight," I said. "I'm here to inform you of changes that have already taken place legally, irrevocably." I closed my laptop. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a business to run." I walked out of that country club for the last time. Ellen beside me. Behind us, I could hear the shouting continue, but it was no longer my concern. The aftermath was swift and comprehensive. The legal fallout hit first. Daniel was removed as co-trustee of all community accounts. A judge froze the HOA assets pending investigation into past financial abuse. I filed fraud reports against Barbara and Greg for the 2015 SUV loan and 2017 business theft. Then came the reputational damage. Somehow, and I truly don't know how, screenshots of Barbara's texts about me were leaked on Reddit and Twitter by someone claiming to be a former board friend. The Chicago Tribune ran a headline, "Heir Apparent. Local woman exposes HOA fraud at country club luncheon." The community fallout was perhaps the most satisfying. Barbara and Greg were ostracized by remaining board members who had their own stories of manipulation and abuse. Daniel quit the HOA legal group after several clients walked out, uncomfortable with the ethical questions surrounding his family's enforcement tactics. I cut all contact and kept it that way. 6 months later, I stood on the deck of the estate property in Willow Creek watching the sunset with Devin. We'd moved in together, combining his urban minimalism with my more eclectic style. The house that had been a symbol of board power was becoming our home. "Any regrets?" he asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind. I thought about it honestly. "No," I said finally. "I don't regret standing up for myself. I don't even regret waiting as long as I did. It all happened when it needed to. And the company? How's that going?" I smiled. Evergreen Community Management was transforming under my leadership. We'd shifted focus to supporting small home businesses and fair enforcement instead of the cutthroat rules my predecessors pushed. The kind of work Uncle Walter had originally wanted before the Kensingtons steered it toward more profitable fines. It's good. Different. Better. Later that night, as Devin slept, I sat at my desk reviewing quarterly reports. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "It's Daniel. We need to talk." I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I blocked the number and turned back to my work. Some covenants aren't meant to be rebuilt. I'll never forget the look on Barbara's face when Uncle Walter's voice played at the country club. She didn't just hear the truth. She watched it take everything she thought she owned. Not just money or property, but control. Control over me, over the narrative, over the neighborhood legacy. For years, I thought I needed their approval to be whole. I thought if I just followed the rules harder, achieved more, became more like Daniel, they would finally see me, respect me. What I realized too late, what Uncle Walter helped me understand, was that their approval was never mine to earn. The problem wasn't me. It never had been. They burned a check worth $38 million thinking they were punishing me, breaking me. Instead, they freed me. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't what you take from others. It's what you finally allow yourself to have. The story of Laura Bennett doesn't end with her triumph at the country club or even with her refusal to engage with Daniel's text. Real life isn't that neat. Real healing isn't that simple. In a year following what the Chicago business community came to call the Willow Creek fracture, I learned that justice and healing are different journeys that sometimes overlap but often diverge in unexpected ways. Daniel was the first to attempt reconciliation, though I use that term loosely. His initial text was followed by emails, voicemails, even a letter delivered to my office by courier. Each communication more desperate than the last. "We need to talk about the community finances. Greg's not well. You should know. This isn't what Uncle Walter would have wanted." The last one nearly broke my resolve, using Uncle Walter against me. It was so predictable, so manipulative, and yet still so effective at triggering the guilt I'd been conditioned to feel. But I reminded myself of Uncle Walter's letter. Use this power wisely, not for revenge, but for justice. What was justice in this case? certainly not allowing myself to be pulled back into their orbit of manipulation and gaslighting. So I maintained my silence. Barbara tried a different approach. She showed up at Arrow and Oak one Tuesday afternoon, dressed impeccably as always, bearing a small gift bag from a boutique I'd once mentioned liking. "Laura, darling," she said as if the country club confrontation had never happened. I was in the neighborhood and thought we could grab lunch. My assistant, Mia, who knew enough about the HOA situation to be wary, hovered protectively nearby. "I'm booked solid today, Barbara," I said, using her first name deliberately. "And I'll be busy tomorrow and the day after that, and every day for the foreseeable future." Her smile faltered but didn't disappear entirely. "I understand you're upset, but we're still neighbors." "No," I corrected her. "We're living in the same development. Neighborhood is something different, something you choose to be or not be every day through your actions." She left the gift bag on the reception desk. After she was gone, I asked Mia to donate it to a women's shelter downtown. I never found out what was inside. Greg took the most direct approach, legal action. He filed a lawsuit claiming I had exerted undue influence over Uncle Walter in his final days, that he had not been of sound mind when he transferred the assets. It was a desperate play. The private investigator Uncle Walter had hired had documented everything, including multiple cognitive assessments that proved Uncle Walter was sharp as ever when he made his decisions. The suit was dismissed with prejudice, but not before costing Greg a significant amount in legal fees. Fees that came from his personal account, since I had restricted his access to community funds. Throughout all this, I focused on my own healing. Weekly therapy sessions helped me understand the depth of the psychological damage I'd endured from years of HOA gaslighting. Support groups for adult children of narcissistic authority figures gave me a community who truly understood, and Devin provided the unconditional support I'd never experienced within the board's orbit. Evergreen Community Management underwent its own transformation. I rebranded it as Evergreen Fair Homes and redirected our investments toward affordable updates, small business allowances, and environmental initiatives. Profits decreased slightly, but impact increased exponentially. This, I felt, honored Uncle Walter's true legacy far better than the cutthroat enforcement tactics the Kensingtons had employed. Arrow and Oak thrived as well. Our client roster grew to include several socially conscious brands who appreciated our authentic approach to marketing. I hired 3 new designers and moved to a larger office space in the West Loop. Life was good. Different, but good. Then came the medical crisis that tested all my boundaries. On a rainy Tuesday in November, almost 18 months after the country club confrontation, I received a call from Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Greg had suffered a major heart attack. He was in critical condition. The old Laura would have dropped everything and rushed to his side, desperate for any crumb of approval he might offer in his vulnerable state. The new Laura sat with the information, consulting with a therapist before making any decisions. "You don't owe him your presence, Dr." Mitchell reminded me. "But whatever you decide, make sure it's what you want, not what conditioning tells you to do or not do." After careful consideration, I decided to visit, not out of obligation, but out of my own sense of closure. I needed to see him, perhaps for the last time on my terms, not his. He looked smaller in the hospital bed, diminished by illness and the knowledge that his schemes had finally failed him. When he saw me, a complex mixture of emotions crossed his face. Surprise, hope, calculation. "Laura," he said, his voice weaker than I'd ever heard it. "You came." "I did," I replied, remaining near the door rather than approaching the bed. "I've been thinking," he started. "I'm not here to negotiate, Greg." I cut him off. "I'm not here to discuss the company or the trust or any of it. I came because I needed to see you, to remind myself that you're just a man, not the all-powerful figure who controlled the neighborhood for so long." He stared at me, speechless perhaps for the first time in his life. "I hope you recover," I continued. "I hope you use this second chance to become a better person. But whether you do or don't, my life will continue on the path I've chosen." I stayed only 10 minutes. We didn't speak of reconciliation or the past. I simply sat in the chair by the window, watching the rain against the glass, occasionally making impersonal small talk about the weather or the hospital food. Then I left. Barbara was in the hallway, clearly having given us space while undoubtedly trying to listen at the door. "He needs his neighbors now," she said, attempting to guilt me. "Then I suggest you be that for him," I replied and walked away. Greg survived the heart attack. According to the neighborhood grapevine, mainly Uncle Robert, who had maintained cautious contact with me, the experience had changed him. He'd retired from the board, started cardiac rehabilitation, even joined a men's support group at the urging of his doctor. I was glad for him, but maintained my distance. Christmas came, and with it the first holiday season I truly enjoyed in years. Devin and I hosted a small gathering at the estate. Friends, a few trusted colleagues, Ms. Burke and her wife. We ate too much, laughed genuinely, exchanged thoughtful gifts. No one monitored my behavior or compared me to anyone else. As the evening wound down and our guests departed, Devin and I stood on the deck, bundled against the winter chill, watching the moonlight on the frozen lake. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside wasn't a ring. We were already engaged. But a key. "What's this for?" I asked. "Our future," he said. "I found a building in Rogers Park. It's perfect for the community arts center you've been talking about. The key is symbolic. We still need to close on it, but I wanted you to have something tangible." Tears filled my eyes. This was what love looked like. Supporting dreams, not crushing them, listening, not dismissing. "It's perfect," I whispered, leaning into his embrace. The Community Arts Center became my passion project throughout the following year. Using a portion of the evergreen profits, I established the Walter Bennett Foundation to run it, offering free classes to underserved youth and subsidized studio space for working artists. At the grand opening in October, a reporter from the Tribune asked about my inspiration. "My uncle believed in creating opportunities for people to become their best selves," I said. "This center honors that belief." The article ran with the headline, "Bennett Air Channels HOA Fortune into Community Good." It included a quote from Ms. Burke about how proud Uncle Walter would have been. I didn't mention the Kensingtons in the interview, but they were mentioned in the article's background section, referred to as estranged board members who faced allegations of financial impropriety. 3 days after the article was published, I received a handwritten letter. Unlike Daniel's desperate messages or Barbara's manipulative overtures, this one was different. It was a single page, handwritten. "Laura, I saw the article about the Arts Center. Walter would have approved. He always said you had the vision the rest of us lacked. I won't ask for forgiveness I haven't earned. I won't pretend I understand the path you've chosen, but I am, despite everything, proud of what you've built from the ashes of our relationship. If someday you're open to a conversation, I would welcome it. If not, please know that I have finally learned to respect your boundaries. Greg." I read it twice, searching for the manipulation, the hidden agenda. For once, I couldn't find it. I showed it to Dr. Mitchell at our next session. "What do you want to do with this?" she asked. "I don't know," I answered honestly. Part of me wants to believe people can change. Another part remembers years of evidence to the contrary. "You don't have to decide today," she reminded me. "Or ever, if that's what feels right." I folded the letter and put it in my desk drawer. Not thrown away, but not responded to either. A maybe for another day. Spring arrived, bringing with it the second anniversary of the country club confrontation. Daniel had given up trying to contact me. Barbara occasionally sent impersonal birthday and Christmas cards that I returned unopened. Greg's letter remained the last communication from that quarter of my life. Devin and I set a wedding date for the following fall. We decided on a small ceremony at the estate, surrounded only by people who truly celebrated our happiness. Arrow and Oak expanded to a second office in Minneapolis. Evergreen Fair Homes funded its 100th small business startup. The Walter Bennett Foundation prepared to open a second community center in a former warehouse on the south side. My life had become exactly what I wanted it to be, successful on my own terms, filled with purpose and genuine connections, free from the toxic patterns that had defined my time in the old HOA. One sunny afternoon in May, I visited Uncle Walter's grave for the first time since his funeral. I brought blue hydrangeas, his favorite, and sat on the bench facing his headstone. "You were right," I said aloud, not caring if anyone overheard. Not about revenge, but about justice, about standing in my truth. A gentle breeze rustled the trees overhead, and I smiled, remembering how he used to say that nature always answers if you know how to listen. As I was leaving the cemetery, I spotted a familiar figure in the distance. Daniel, standing at another grave. Our eyes met briefly across the rows of headstones. He raised his hand in a tentative gesture, not quite a wave, more an acknowledgement of my presence. After a moment's hesitation, I returned the gesture, then continued to my car without approaching him. That night, I told Devin about the encounter. "Do you think you'll ever reconcile with any of them?" he asked. I considered the question seriously. "I don't know. Maybe someday with Daniel. He was as much a product of their conditioning as I was, just in a different way. But reconciliation would require real accountability, real change, not just words." "And the Kensingtons?" I shook my head. "Some relationships aren't meant to be saved. Sometimes the healthiest thing is to acknowledge that and move on." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." And that perhaps was the greatest gift I'd received through this entire journey. The freedom to decide my own path forward, guided by my own values rather than someone else's expectations. The power to choose who belonged in my life and on what terms. They had burned what they thought was my future, smiling as they did it. In reality, they had only burned the last ties binding me to a past that never served me. From those ashes, I had built something better, something real, something mine. That was the true inheritance Uncle Walter had left me. Not money or property or power, but the courage to claim my own life. And no one can ever take that away.